All right. You can go ahead, Greta. We're live.
Okay, good afternoon. And first, let me say thank you for taking some time to join us on this joint webcast for superintendents as well as directors of special education, as well as regional cooperative directors and regional special education cooperative directors. What we wanted to do today is just take a little bit of time to talk to you about some of the guidance that's come out of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning at the Department of Education, as well as the guidance that we have shared on behalf of USED's Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, as you'll hear me say throughout the webcast. Before we jump in and get started, I wanted to give Commissioner Brown just an opportunity to share some words before we jump in.
Thank you, Greta. I want to welcome everyone for joining us today. This is part of our efforts to continue to support schools in different districts during this unprecedented time. As you know, we are committed to three different areas that I've boiled down into three words. That is to educate, feed, and support, and that we want to assist districts in how you're providing educational services to your students at this time, assist you as you are feeding. We are currently, I think, 100% across the state have feeding, some 2,000 feeding sites, which is an amazing feat. Many of those sites did not come online until the last few weeks. And then lastly, support you. In that we aim to support you, continue sending funds your way so that you can also support your employees and your community. So that's our pledge to you during this time. I also wanted to make sure that you know that we've launched a new COVID web launch page so that you will have an easier time finding resources on the Kentucky Department of Education website instead of having to spend time going on the different pages there. We hope that's helpful. And then we also have an email address for education related questions related to COVID-19. Of course, all communications related to the virus itself, as well as public health questions, should go to the main COVID-19 site at kentucky.gov. But the email address for KDE related questions, COVID-19 at education.ky.gov. And then continuing our series of superintendent webinars, we are planning a superintendent webinar on Tuesday from 2 to 4, I believe, and that is going to focus on funding. And we will also have an invite to your finance directors as well, both federal funding, state funding, and then local funding questions that you may have as well related to the COVID-19 crisis. So I know we have a lot to cover today, and Greta, I'll turn it back over to you. And then obviously we do have some PowerPoints. I think, Greta, you have several folks that will be giving presentations, but then we want to devote about half of the webinar today. I think we've allotted 2 hours, but definitely at least a half of it to a good question and answer time. I'll turn it back over to you, Greta.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Brown. So today we do have some PowerPoint slides that we're going to pop up for you to be able to view. But you're going to hear a little bit from me as well as the division directors in the office. So in addition to spending a little bit of time taking you through the guidance and answering some of these frequently asked questions that we've received, I wanted you to have the opportunity to have the OSIL leadership team on the line and share specific components of work that we're working on in an effort to assist schools and districts through this uncertain time and be able to answer questions. So as the commissioner said, we certainly want to dedicate most of our time to your questions. And you'll see here just in this first slide, just to let you know who's on the line, Sylvia Starkey is the division director for IDA monitoring and results, and she'll share some information around just some of the compliance pieces that we have to work through, even through this time, as well as, just day-to-day work. Veronica Sullivan is going to share with you the work going on in the Division of IDA Implementation in Preschool to discuss some of the actual instructional practices that schools and districts can rely on while we're trying to educate students with disabilities in a very different setting through NTI. And Kevin Stoll, who's the director of the Division of State Schools, which is Kentucky School for the Blind and Kentucky School for the Deaf, is going to talk to you a little bit about how we are essentially practicing what we preach, because we come at this in our office from a very unique position, in that not only do we provide this guidance and oversight to special education, but we're also operating 2 schools. So we're in this with you as well, and it provides for a way for us to understand all of the questions that are being asked and to empathize with you while we get through this. So moving into the next slide. This is really just, these are some of the high points about educating students with IEPs during NTI. First and foremost, with students with disabilities, we have to ensure that we're providing a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. That doesn't go away just because we're educating students differently. It, however, does become very challenging because we're operating within the parameters of the NTI, and you guys within your district have identified, what NTI will look like for each of your individual districts. But then there's also this added piece of ensuring that IEPs are being implemented for individual students, and the location and the method for educating these students has changed significantly, and it changed quickly. We understand that. We understand that that's through, nobody could have anticipated this, but to get through it, probably, and this is oversimplifying it, but probably the most effective piece of information would be to ensure that students with disabilities have equal access to the same opportunities as peers without disabilities. Across the nation, although it wasn't in Kentucky, there were some states whose state agencies and other advocacy groups and attorneys and folks said, you can't provide an equitable opportunity for students with disabilities, so therefore we will close schools. And this resulted in some schools closing their doors for 2 weeks, statewide, because they were afraid to continue to provide services, because they were afraid that they couldn't provide students with disabilities the same services as their non-disabled peers. Well, as you can imagine, this resulted in a lot of backlash from the disability community, who felt like that people with disabilities were being, quote, blamed for school closures during this time. And so the USAID, OSERS, and OCR came out with the supplemental fact sheet to say, essentially, stop doing that. You can provide services to students with disabilities in a different environment. And the importance is to provide equity. So what does that look like? If you have students that you're providing virtual instruction, then try to provide virtual instruction for kids with disabilities as well. If you're sending home schoolwork packets, try to send packets home for students with disabilities as well. And all while we understand that that may look very different based on IEP goals, but don't exclude a group of kids just solely based on a disability. We also understand that during this time, IEP goals and objectives and services and accommodations may not look exactly like they look in that IEP before COVID-19. But the key is to provide comparable services through whatever alternative means that you can. The way that I say it, that again oversimplifies it, but there's some truth in this, is that something is better than nothing. So you do what you can and essentially document what you can't. And it really is about making that good faith effort. If there are ARCs, for example, that need to occur, then go ahead and have those. Have those by phone, have those virtually, have those however it works best for your district, but conduct the meetings. The same components apply in the IDA about, you offer alternative options with multiple meeting notices and then move forward with the meeting. And that can be done, through Teams or Skype or telephone even, whatever works best for you, go ahead and have those. So again, that's that good faith effort. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, oh wait, go back one, I'm sorry. There, right there. So as I mentioned, about the documentation during this time, folks, I can't stress this enough. Documentation is, I mean, that's the key. That's what's going to get us to the other side of this and be able to have the information that we need to make informed decisions moving forward. So collect ongoing progress data for all the services that you're implementing. And I know that's easier said than done. I hear myself say it. And then, even at, as you'll hear from Kevin Stoll in a minute around KSB and KSD, we know it's not easy. But, we've had several questions around specifically discipline data. If I have kids with behavior concern, how in the world do we document that, that progress has been made? Because, perhaps you can't go conducting, the observation 3 times a week in a general education setting, or, during transition periods, or whatever that that looks like on the IP. But what you can do during this time is you can modify that for this, think about alternate means of collecting data. So if it's an older student, perhaps they self-monitor their feelings or emotions or whatever that looks like. If it's a younger student, perhaps you have just emotion check sheets. We've all seen those little self-monitoring progress tools for the youngest students. This is a time to get super creative, to be able to get to some type of progress monitoring data. It doesn't have to look exactly like that IEP. So what we're saying is, again, something is better than nothing. There are going to be services that likely cannot be performed, either virtually or over the phone, although I think this is probably going to be the exception rather than the rule. And it's critical for you to document those services missed. Because if students miss services, or if they're unable to make adequate progress, then the only remedy for that when we come to the other side of the situation is compensatory education. And what needs to happen is when we get through this and schools are back in session and you're having your annual meetings or your special called ARC meetings, you're going to have to rely on that data in the ARC to determine if each individual student made reasonable progress, and if he or she didn't, then what amount of compensatory education services are due. We understand that this is going to be, depending on how long this lasts and what services are provided or unable to be provided, we understand that this may become, somewhat of a fiscal impact for schools and districts as well as the state as we move forward. And just let me say, rest assured that there are several groups, states as well as the National Association for State Directors are making pleas and pushes with USAID to advocate for additional IDA funding from Congress. So just stay tuned on where that lands. And also moving forward, probably one of the biggest lessons learned from this that I don't think that we ever really talked about as a state or as districts or even as a nation is the need for contingency plans and IEPs. It's been a big lesson learned for our office, and as we move forward, it's one of the components where we intend to put out some additional guidance. But nobody thinks about a pandemic occurring, right? I mean, it's been over 100 years since the last one, and hopefully it'll be more than 100 since until the next one. But, should you be one of those really super innovative districts who have contingency plans, perhaps you have, the fallback method for how you're going to provide comparable services. I venture to say most districts probably don't. So moving forward, we probably want to think about what happens, when something like this happens in the future? What's your fallback plan? What's your contingency? So all that to say, just stay tuned for additional guidance for that. What we don't want is we don't want 106,000 students with disabilities to have IEPs that all look like they're recreated or amended just for NTI days. Because having an IEP that essentially is the contingency plan is not appropriate, because that we don't want to change a student's program based on what we can do currently. The student's needs and data and all of the triangulation of data was what was used to write the IEP. Now we just have to implement it differently, but we don't want to go backward and say that this is all we can do, so we're going to write an IEP to fit inside this box. That would be very inappropriate. So moving forward to the next slide, many of you have asked about what flexibility can we offer, and I want to take just a few minutes to talk about this, because I anticipate this will be an area where still many of you still have and continue to have questions. The supplemental fact sheet that came out from OSERS and OCR looks at five-ish areas of hot topics, if you will, areas where states and districts have asked for leniencies or flexibility. And I wanted to just summarize these quickly and toss out a slide so you would have easy access to these, because I think these are the big ones. Many of these are actually written in statute. For example, the initial eligibility determination, that is set forth in the IDEA. So states don't have the ability to extend any type of waiver or flexibility, just like USAID doesn't. That would actually take a change from Congress to the IDEA. State complaints and due process hearings, those can possibly be extended depending upon exceptional circumstances and the decision of the hearing officer if it's a due process hearing. The other question, and we've received this one a lot, is around IEP timelines and annual reviews. I think most districts are making a good faith effort to go ahead and have those ARC meetings and extend, or not extend, but to review and revise the IEP. But if for whatever reason you just absolutely can't, then it's not a requirement that we can waive, but I would strongly advise you to make every effort to try. And if you can't, you need to document that and explain why. Moving forward into a year from now, thinking about the monitoring that my office will do, we know we're going to see things that were just beyond your control, like the 60-day timeline. You can't get into homes and finish the evaluation for students that were in progress. Kids can't be brought into the building to do that just because of the safety concern. But it doesn't mean you just stop. It means that you conduct the ARC meeting, explain to parents, and parents for the most part, I think, are going to understand, because they don't want their children endangered during this pandemic either. And so you document it, keep those lines of communication open. I can't stress enough how important it is right now to document, collaborate, be creative, and communicate, and explain how you plan to pick up the evaluation once schools are back in session. Next slide. So just some additional resources and information that are available to you. A couple of things that we've put out of my office. We initially, when this first was happening and things were just moving so quickly by the hour, we issued the non-regulatory guidance regarding implementation of IEPs during the pandemic through NTI. I think most of you have received copies of that. I've pushed everything out over the DOS listserv, so everyone should have it. If by chance you're a director of special education and you don't have access to the DOS listserv, then let me know and we'll be sure to get you included. It's also on our website. We also issued a letter to parents and families, just letting them know what to expect. And I appreciate your directors of special education and regional folks for helping us push that out to families. We don't have a listserv of families or their addresses or email addresses, so I appreciate you getting that out to the community. And then the tools for teaching students with significant cognitive disabilities. We understand that of the 106,000 plus students across the Commonwealth with IEPs, we understand that students with the most significant cognitive disabilities may be some of the toughest to reach during this pandemic. So we've compiled a list of resources and put those together and put it out on just a tools and resource sheet for you to be able to share either with your teachers or with families or however that tool is best used for you. So please take a look at those. There's also a link in here to U.S. Department of Education's COVID-19 information resources. There's a ton of resources on that page, and we didn't list them all because it's just too many for the PowerPoint. But when you get it and you want to click on the link, you'll be able to get there. This is the screenshot is the actual website for my office that's got the resources for the special education and early learning, as well as links to USED's resources. And you'll see over on the side, there's tons of links, links to the frequently asked questions. So please take a look at that. Some of the questions that you have may be captured in there. And then moving forward to the next slide. This is where we're going to break out into divisions, and I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia Starkey to talk to you a little bit about what you can expect with regard to the compliance pieces that are in her division.
Hi, good afternoon. Like she said, I'm Sylvia Starkey. I'm the director of the Division of IDEA Monitoring and Results, and we do all of the special education monitoring. So we're just going to talk through a couple of quick things. Hopefully we can answer some of your questions that we've already seen that you guys have. So let's first talk about LEA annual determinations. This year's LEA annual determinations, I know that's a big question a lot of people have, are based on data from the 2018-19 school year. So they will move forward as if nothing had happened. They are tentatively scheduled for release in early June. And we are looking at how we can provide flexibility and how we can change determinations based on how they were impacted by the pandemic. So we know a couple of things. So part of current determinations includes testing. And so if we're not having testing, that's something we'll have to look at. How can we look at things differently? So just rest assured that that's something that we're looking at. And as soon as we know what that's going to look like and we hear more information about how to move forward in that aspect, we will let you know. The next thing we were going to talk about is emailing IEPs and other ARC documentation securely. And so that's a question we've had a lot of questions about that. On March 26th, there was an email that went out over the DOE Secure listserv. And so it came from Amy Patterson. If you need us to send us to you again, please let us know and we'll be happy to send it. But it went over a couple of key points. The first thing is to make sure before you do that you obtain signed consent prior to sending any kind of document over email that has personally identifiable information on it. The next point was just making sure to password protect documents with personally identifiable information prior to sending them over email. So make sure that you're password protecting things. Don't send that password in the same email. Ideally, you would call the parent and give them the password verbally so that there is no documentation of it. But if that's not available, then you would want to send that password in a separate email from the actual document. Use things like encryption software to encrypt the document and the email or the email. You may want to consider using snail mail instead of emailing. And just keep in mind that Microsoft Teams is available to districts and it includes security standards that are required by KDE. You can transfer documents on Teams. But districts would have to ensure that that connections are secure. And that email goes through some more some suggested platforms. So you may want to go back and look at that. Your director of special education should be able to get it to you if that's something you haven't seen. The next thing we're going to talk about is Indicator 4 reports. Indicator 4 is based on out of school removals greater than 10 days. It's actually a compliance indicator, which is based on data that lags 2 years. And so what we know to be true is general supervision is not waived as part of the pandemic. And so we do have to continue to do things like Indicator 4 that are compliance indicators and continue to look at those things. They've already been reviewed. The reports are ready to go, and districts are still in session. And so because districts are still in session and providing instruction to students, we felt like it was important that we go ahead and get those reports to you. There are 7 total districts that this impacts in the state. So it's not a huge impact on the entire state. It'll only impact 7 districts. Those will be coming out tomorrow, which is April 1st. We anticipate that any kind of corrective action plan that came with it would look different than it typically has before. But we also want to reiterate that not every one of the 7 districts is getting a cap. So we just wanted to kind of let you guys know before you had those come your way tomorrow. Another question that we saw that we're getting is about consolidated monitoring, which includes IDEA, GT, which is gifted and talented, and preschool. So far, we have visited 5 districts this year. 1 district has already gotten its report, and there are several that are pending. We've actually held those to just allow you guys to give you a chance to kind of catch your breath and get to where you're at. We anticipate that those reports will go out soon. We don't have an exact date for those. The remaining districts that weren't visited but were on the schedule were actually notified today that consolidated monitoring was suspended until spring of 2021. So if you were one of those districts, then you got that email this morning to explain kind of what the plan is and how that's going to move forward. And so all of those, you can expect that your IDEA, GT, and preschool reports will come out together once they're released. And you can expect those fairly soon. And then the next thing I wanted to make sure we talked about is corrective action plans. I'm getting a lot of questions about whether corrective action plans can just keep on going, or do we need to work on these? So again, we're going to say, you know, there's an old OSEP memo called OSEP memo 0902 is what we call it. And it's called timely correction of noncompliance if you're searching for it online. But it requires all noncompliance to be corrected as soon as possible, but in no case greater than 1 year from the original notification of noncompliance. And so once that is notified, we're not able to change that 1 year deadline, but we are able to change any kind of internal deadline that was on your corrective action plan. So if you had written your corrective action plan and you said that something was going to be due, let's say next week, there's some flexibility that we're able to provide you in moving some deadlines around for things that aren't able to be done virtually, or if there was something that some kind of record that you're not able to get to because it's at the school and you're not able to get to your school. Those things will all be taken into consideration. I would encourage you to contact your CAP lead if you have a corrective action plan that's outstanding, an older one, to think about to discuss with them how we can be flexible. You know, I'm happy to sit in those meetings as well. I'm happy to discuss with you any kind of exceptional circumstance that you may have going on in your district. I think it's going to be really important for us to communicate through this process. So I can't really stress enough the importance of communicating with us what you guys have going on in regards to your corrective action plan, so we can provide flexibility where we're able and help you seek solutions where we're not able to provide as much flexibility. We would also, you know, just encourage you to figure out how can you do things digitally. Could you review direct records based on what you already have in Infinite Campus, and can people do that from working from home? So those kinds of things as well. And then Greta hit on dispute resolution a little bit earlier. And you know, the things to keep in mind is that exceptional circumstances for things like IDEA formal complaints, they're on a 60-day timeline, and that 60-day timeline has not changed. And they did not tell us that we could extend every complaint based on exceptional circumstances. However, they may be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So if you feel like there's some reason that you couldn't get us a document that we needed or anything like that, just again, I'm going to remind you that communication is going to be key. Make sure that you're getting in touch with your complaint investigator as soon as you're able to let them know your situation. And we're going to provide as much flexibility as we're able to, and we'll make those exceptional circumstances based on a case-by-case basis. The good thing about IDEA formal complaints is that they were already digital. We had already moved that way, and we contract with, you know, several contractors from out of state. And so we had already set up a way to securely transfer those records. So it's been very successful so far. So we're set up in a little bit better situation than some other states. But definitely make sure that you're contacting your complaint investigator, your mediator, any hearing officer that you have to have all of your questions answered, since so many of these decisions have to be made case by case. We would encourage you to reach out as soon as you're able, for us to be able to talk you through any kind of situation. Like we said, we don't anticipate that things are going to look the same. We know that when we're monitoring next year, we're not going to look at it the same way that we've looked at things before. We don't anticipate coming in with an iron fist after all of this is over and saying, you know, nobody provided anything. We're going to definitely look at how did you document what happened and how can we look at that moving forward. So I think Veronica is next.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica Sullivan. I am the director for the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool. So I'm excited to announce a series of web sessions hosted by KDE and presented by the Special Education Regional Cooperatives. Just to provide some context for those who don't know, the Special Education Regional Cooperatives are funded through federal IDEA dollars to provide districts with the support needed to improve educational outcomes for students with disabilities. They are considered an extension of KDE and provide instructional expertise to districts in their regions. And through this series, all 9 of the regions are going to come together to create a statewide web-based resource for all districts across the state. These sessions will be short, 30-minute sessions, focus on topics designed to highlight effective practices during NTI for students with disabilities. There's a lot of information that's out there and resources that are out there. So we're hoping that these series will help narrow down for educators what practices they want to try during this virtual environment. These series will be recorded and they'll be shared on the KDE website. So if you're unable to attend these sessions, we'll have those available to you. Similar to the special ed regional cooperatives, we have the early childhood regional training centers that are also funded through federal IDEA dollars. They will be providing a similar web series, that we're in the planning stages of that now, and that will be aimed at educating preschools, students with disabilities during NTI. And since the regions are serving as the boots on the ground support for KDE, they're reaching out to districts in their areas who may be interested in sharing the work they're doing during NTI. That's through our special education spotlight. And we're hoping by shining a spotlight on this exceptional work in districts, we can support, the districts can support each other as we're all trying to focus on providing high quality instruction for students with disabilities. So if anyone listening is interested in becoming a special education spotlight district, please reach out to your special education regional cooperative. Next slide, please. We have included a map of the special education regions so that you can identify, if you're not aware already, which region serves your district. Next slide. We also have a list of directors so that you can contact them directly if you have questions or need support with instruction. Next slide. We also included a map of the early childhood regional training centers. As you can see, it's a little different than the special education regional cooperatives. Again, they support preschool, and there are 5 of them. Next slide. And a list of the directors as well, if you would like support for preschool students with disabilities. Next slide. And the final thing I wanted to share today is we have started a NTI Students with Disability resource page. We will have resources up beginning this Friday. We're going to take, again, those videos of the web series and have those here, as well as links to any materials that are shared during the series so that districts can access them moving forward. And I think Kevin Stahl, you're up next.
Kevin, are you still connected? I'll go ahead and jump in and take over Kevin's slides. He may be having connectivity issues, so if he's able to join, I will turn it back over to him. But as I spoke earlier, this office oversees KSB and KSD as well, so we're in the same boat as you are out there in the districts with trying to navigate these unusual times while also ensuring that we're providing faith to our students. And it is challenging. And so because of this, I think it probably puts us in a better position to really understand the struggles and the challenges that you're facing while you are trying to navigate all the requirements of the day-to-day work, while adjusting to the stress around the pandemic, while also trying to figure out how to ensure equitable services for all students. So KSB and KSD has worked really hard to ensure that our students have access to appropriate and engaging instruction during this time. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If anybody had asked me a few months ago if I thought KSB and KSD would ever utilize NTI, I would have said no, because quite honestly, I was just really unsure how that could happen for students who have just varying disabilities and unique needs. And so a big shout out to principals and Kevin, to all the work that they've done to ensure that we were able to do this. But first, before we do that, one of the things that Kevin has mentioned, and I know he wanted to take a moment and just express his appreciation to all of you, because as Commissioner Brown mentioned a moment ago, the ability to feed all of our students and make sure that all of their needs were met, rested with you guys. And just a big shout out and thank you for welcoming our students back into the communities and providing them with meals and working so closely with our director of special education as well as others from the schools. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm sure Kevin, he also wanted to extend his appreciation for that as well. But when NTI started with KSB and KSD, the first thing that they did, the principals and teachers and the entire staff, director of special education, everyone came together and they looked at individual students' IEPs. And the key behind this was to provide individualized instruction. So students were provided, with whatever assistive technology needs that they had, as well as, instructional packets. As I said, it looks very different. They perform virtual assignments. The staff, they have weekly meetings with students. Teachers are reaching out to students. One of the things that we have heard, not particularly with the schools, but just overall, is how do we contact students? Excuse me. How do we contact students and parents without being too many people contacting at all hours of the day? So how do we allow them enough time to provide instruction, but also the times that they need to decompress? And one of the things that we're doing at the schools that could also be mimicked across the state is that rather than having 6, 7, 8 people call, we lean toward the case manager to make the contact, because the case manager is essentially the person responsible for that due process file and managing all of the progress data. So that seems to help relieve a little bit of the burden on parents and families, because we don't want to have 4 or 5 gen ed teachers call, and a special ed teacher and a speech path, and and the list goes on and on and on. And so that's something just for consideration.
Greta, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. Not sure what happened there. Everything was good before, but you know how that goes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've done a great job with stuff. So I'll try not to climb on top of anything that you said. I appreciate you recognizing the districts for sharing the support of our students as they came back. So thank you very much for that. We'll share with you. I understood where Greta was at that point, and hopefully I can just continue to build off of that and talk about the intention that was given by teachers to where the students were in their individual education programs before making decisions about the assignments. They've done a great job of giving that consideration and then following up on that. And as you guys can imagine, at KSB and KSD, we don't have the confined boundaries that you have. So they've continued to recognize areas of support and continue to grow that. I only share that to encourage you to do the same as you're working with your kids. Keep in mind that if you've dropped something along the way, add it now. As Greta has shared several times today, it's important to be doing something as opposed to doing nothing. And those schools have been great about doing that. They're doing a great job of tracking and documenting. They're using Google in some ways that help support this tracking. They're using Google Sheets to track the contacts that are being made with their students on a daily basis. It also allows them to track what's going on with their teaching staff to ensure that they're continuing to support all the way through. And again, our schools are smaller and we understand that, but if you were to assign that as something with a case manager, it certainly would be a way that you could support and track what's going on by that individual case manager with those individual students. So we would encourage that. We're also exploring and working with the idea of telehealth. It's a challenging piece for everyone and we're learning, and I wouldn't begin to suggest to you that we've resolve that issue, but we're continuing to work through it and we're exploring different platforms to see what works best. As you can imagine, with our students who are used to ASL as their primary language, our folks have continued to reach out to them in a variety of ways to try to make sure that they're accommodating them. And that's what we would encourage you to do as well, whether it's FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, video phones, anything that you can possibly think of, just to give you another avenue to reach the students who are in need of you, perhaps sometimes the most. The schools are also trying to make sure that they stay closely connected with their staff. They're meeting on a weekly basis in either a Skype or a Zoom session to make sure that they are staying up to date. Our principals are making sure that they are keeping their staff informed about what's coming, trying to be out in front and answer questions and be transparent. None of us know the answers to everything, but we're trying to provide those as best we possibly can. Also, on occasion, we'll do, or not on occasion, but on a daily basis, as an example at KSD, they check in each morning and kind of check out each afternoon with just a Google Doc. It's not a requirement on a daily basis, but it's a place where they can step in. It doesn't require video, but they can touch base with each other. Principal can make sure that they're fully aware of things that are happening that day. And they can be very positive things. It's a great place for connectivity to exist. And so we would encourage you to continue to make intentional efforts to stay connected, not only to your students as frequently as you can, but also with your staff to support what's going on. It's a challenge for them. It's a challenge for you. And we appreciate all the efforts that you're making. Greta, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, so a big thank you to my team for being able to provide some additional information. And I'm looking at the soapbox. We have a ton of questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Tony, who's going to help us moderate questions in the soapbox.
All right, give me 1 second. Andy, if you can put the code up there for the questions, if they want to continue to submit questions. All right, so the first question is, if parents decline services either on a limited basis or completely during this extended NTI time, how do you recommend a district respond?
So this is where things get a little sticky, if you will. When providing special education and related services, the ARC makes those determinations, and the ability to pick and choose services, if you will, is not one that's allowable under the IDA. Either the parents and guardians accept special education related services or they don't. And then the ARC makes the determination as to what that looks like with the input from parents. So all of that to say that the requirement is on the district to offer FAPE. If you find yourself in a situation that you're unable to do so, then my recommendation would be to, again, document. You want to try to have the ARC meeting. You want to communicate with parents. You want to try to work through whatever situation there may be that's presenting itself to be as being a barrier to getting these services in. What I would advise caution on is doing nothing, essentially. So, if you try to provide services a couple of times and, on the phone, a parent says, thanks, but no thanks, and then you have no documentation whatsoever that additional attempts were made or that services were rejected or that you were unable to perform those, then when you get to the other side of this and you're looking at a lack of progress, because obviously there's going to be a lack of progress if a student wasn't provided services, then without the documentation, there's no evidence as to why services were not provided.
Okay. All right, our next one is going to be, if we go beyond 10 days, is this a change of placement?
No, this is not a change of placement, and that's a conversation that's a lot of states have had around this. And should we be providing prior written notice and conducting ARC meetings for change of placement? This is a change of location. All students with and without disabilities are experiencing education from a different setting. So this is simply a change of location.
Will we need to have an ARC for every special education student upon return to school to discuss compensatory education?
Yeah, there's going to need to be an ARC for every student, but and I wouldn't say the need for the ARC is going to be to discuss compensatory education. the need for the ARC is going to be to review and revise the student's IEP and determine what changes need to be made. So, for example, you're going to have students who have annuals at the end of the school year. You want to continue with those annual reviews and then determine what services you're not going to be able to provide, and you may start having those conversations as soon as like now. So again, some of those ARCs I think will happen naturally within the annual review, and some of them you may just have to schedule additional ARCs. But this is no different than any other time. Anytime that a student with a disability is not making progress, then you have to have an ARC anyway. So this is not a game changer.
Okay. The next question is, we already spend hundreds of thousands from the general fund to support our special education programs. How will we fund compensatory education?
I think we have Chris Thacker on the phone.
Yes, this is Chris Thacker. Compensatory education is not an allowable use for the IDEA funds, so those would still have to be paid from the general fund or other fund sources.
Okay. With ARCs being held virtually, what is the guidance regarding getting paperwork to the parent after the ARCs?
Sylvia, are you on the line still?
Yes, I'm here. Can you repeat the question? Sorry, my son walked up right when you asked it.
Working from home.
Yeah, it's real around here.
With ARCs being held virtually, what is the guidance regarding getting paperwork to the parent after ARCs?
So that was the same question that we talked about when we were talking about emailing IEPs securely. I would encourage you to reach out to your director of special education to get the email. And we talked about just making sure that you have obtained, consent prior to sending the personally identifiable information, that you're password protecting it and using encryption software. Consider whether you should use snail mail instead of emailing. And that also goes through several platforms. The email will go through several different platforms that you are able to use.
If we are talking to parents regarding teletherapy setup, alternate activities to complete, etc., do those take the place of required therapy minutes?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. If the question is, can we use teletherapy in place of face-to-face therapy, then yes, that's acceptable during this time.
Okay, and then I think to piggyback off of that, what procedures need to be followed for the provision of teletherapy for small groups?
We need to dig into this one a little bit further. I think Sylvia is actually engaged in some conversation with others at Public Health. And so if you can give us a little bit of time, yeah, we'll provide some answers to that.
Yeah, there's several questions like groups in HIPAA compliance. There's questions about how does it impact certification and all of those things. We're working with the Department of Public Health right now to get those answers to you as quickly as we can. And as soon as we have those answers, we'll get them out to the thing. It's just going to take us a little bit longer to research. We want to make sure we get to the right people before we release it.
Okay. How do we do virtual signature to get permission to send via email encrypted? And I think this was addressed. I just think there might be a question as to how they do the virtual signature.
Is Amy Patterson on the line?
She may be watching the live version. I'm not sure she's on this line.
Amy recently sent out some information over the DOSE listserv that answers this specific question. We can send that back out.
Can you all hear me?
Oh, yes, there she is.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. So that is a really good question. And I probably need to do more research on that as well. The best way to do it, if it's possible, is to just have them sign and scan or fax. I realize that not everybody has that option at home, but not everybody has email at home either. So it may have to go through the mail. You know, that's really the best option. But I will do some research to find out if like an electronic signature is acceptable. I have to follow up with legal on that before I give any answer definitively.
Okay. Our next question is, are we required to send out midterm progress reports for students with special needs?
Yes, those progress reports need to continue to go out. I don't know if we can do a little more research into that. Todd, if you're on the line, do you have any thoughts on that?
On interim progress reports?
Yes.
My general thought would be, to the extent that the district can continue to provide that, just like they would be providing it via electronic means, any other documents via electronic means, to go ahead and send that out. And also on the previous question regarding electronic signatures, we've got some research in our office that we've provided before, just general guidance, how that applies to documents in general, not necessarily special ed, but I think it would be applicable in this situation as well, that we're happy to provide with to OCL, and they can circulate that out to directors of special education.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see here. Must district conduct ARC meetings with all students to change school-based services to home-based services, such as virtual instruction by video or phone, as those contingency plans are not currently included in the IEPs?
No, I wouldn't recommend doing that. That goes back to what I was saying a little bit ago. If you have the current IEP that's based on the students' needs and the data that support what those unique needs are, and we know during this time we're going to have to provide services through alternative means, as equitably as possible. So no, please don't hear me say that you should conduct ARC meetings to change things for the virtual environment, because that, should we do that, I could almost see a problem with that, because then we would be saying, here's what we can do, and we're writing your IEP based on what we can provide, and that's wholly inappropriate. So it goes back to doing what you can right now. Something is better than nothing, and then documenting what you can't.
Okay. And I just want to send a reminder to the superintendents that are listening. We are compiling all of these questions and putting them into eventually the yellow sheet, the FAQ sheet that we're referring to as the yellow sheet. And so they will also go there as well on our home sheet. So our next question is going to be, initial evaluation for SLD was planned using the RTI model, but 4 weeks of tier 3 data was still needed. How do we proceed?
So this sounds like it's a student-specific question, and again, there are so many of these questions that, folks, just to be completely honest, we are, we're doing the best we can as well in interpreting some of the guidance from OSEP, and we fully expect that as we move forward, we expect and hope to get additional guidance from OSEP, and we're hoping and advocating for flexibilities as well. So keep in mind that things could change at any day. And as I get changes, I'm going to send those out on the DOS listserv and ensure that that your directors of special education and the regional directors of special education have everything that we have. But back to this specific question, if you have enough data to go ahead and make the determination, I would say go ahead and make the determination. If you don't have enough data, then meet and explain how you're going to do that moving forward. And the reason I say that is because we would never want, and this comes back to I'm not speaking from a statute or regulation here. I'm coming at this from kind of a common sense approach. So Todd, feel free to jump in front of me if you need to. But we would not want to delay any services that could be provided to a student who has a specific learning disability just because we have to do things a little bit differently. So if you have the data, don't let the checkbox stand in your way of doing what's right for a student.
This is more of a comment versus a question, but several people put an arrow by it, so apparently it's an issue. Looking at the compensatory education and therapist teachers' current caseload, it is going to be so difficult to provide current level of service plus comp services once school does return.
I completely agree. That's why it's so important to document, do everything that you can to push out all the services that you absolutely can. And I know that it's a big lift. Let me say that. I understand that there's a lot going on in the world right now, and it's really easy for me to say these things, but it's extremely hard on the ground to implement. And you know, we're going to do everything that we can to get all the flexibilities that we can, but you know, first and foremost, we want to do what's right by our students with disabilities. And it's critical that we, you know, keep the eye on the ball right now, because moving forward, we're not going to have the staff or the funding to catch up, you know, all the services that we should have or could have provided differently during this time.
We have a few parents not wanting services at this time. Do we need to have an ARC to suspend the services until school resumes?
No, I don't think there's any option to suspend services. This goes back to the comment that I made before. Communicate. Figure out what's going on. What barriers can you break down? What can you do to help parents, you know, during this time, and provide services to those students? But FAPE should and must be provided or made available.
Okay. Sorry, there was a request to turn my volume up. I apologize. Going back to my questions. Can you provide advice for continuing with O&M services?
This is going to be a tough one. This is one of those situations where, you know, if you can't provide face-to-face, I'm not sure. I would, you know, I'm going to look to Kevin and see if he has any ideas. If not, I would want to consult with an O&M provider to provide an answer to this one. Kevin, do you have any thoughts?
So we've been trying to continue in any way that we could. But it is a challenge when, like you said, if we can't get the face-to-face, then that's difficult. There have been some materials that have been shared, and then they're trying to follow up on a face-to-face. But to tell you I have a great example of how we've been able to knock it out, I can't do that right now.
Okay. Are we okay to wait until school is back in session to send ARC paperwork, since we cannot go into the office to mail out?
So one of the things that, again, this is my knee-jerk reaction. Todd, you may want to weigh in on this as well. But one of the things that you may want to consider doing, if you know you can't mail it out without being in the office, and you can't get back to the office to do that, you may want to capture that in the conference summary, that the minutes were, you know, maybe read to the parent, or your screen was shared, or whatever. Again, creativity, here's your friend. And that the minutes will be mailed as soon as you can get back into the building. Todd, team, does anybody have any better ideas?
I agree with you, Greta. In general, I would also encourage districts to just review their practices for how they can make provision for someone in the building to print those documents and get them mailed in a timely manner, if they're relying on snail mail to send documents out.
All right. What about the KEDS data, KEDS data? Will this data be collected for spring 2020?
Veronica, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So the short answer is we don't know. We are working with the Human Development Institute, who houses our data. The KEDS data is actually data that is reported in the annual progress report by states to the Office of Special Education Programs. And we, again, are waiting on some guidance from OSEP around how they're going to handle those indicator pieces. But in the meantime, we're working with HDI to kind of, come up with a scenario of how we can use what's already been entered into the system, or how quickly we can open a window should school resume. So we're just working on it. So the answer is we still don't know, but as soon as we have some guidance, we'll get that to the districts.
Okay, if our district uses NTI for the remainder of the school year, going right into summer break, will the district be allowed the opportunity to recoup skills potentially lost over the summer?
So I'm not sure that I completely understand this question. If it's a question around extended school year, maybe, I don't know. But one of the things that I do want to bring your attention to, and this may not answer this question, and if not, I apologize. So feel free, whomever answered this question, to shoot me an email and let's chat about it further. But if the question's around ESY versus compensatory education, then ESY is not an appropriate, it's not appropriate for the remedy for failing to provide services. Recoupment and regression for skills lost of content that has already been taught is the standard for ESY. If it's because a student missed services, then that's a compensatory education requirement.
Okay. Where we are, how can we hold this many ARCs when we return? Some districts have thousands.
I mean, no doubt about it, it's going to be tough. But again, you're having those annual ARC meetings anyway, so this is not changing that. What you could think about doing is, the requirement is that you have an annual review within the year. It doesn't say you can't have it sooner than a year. And so if you have it, if you have your annual review to meet your timeline in May, but, and I'm just totally making this up, but let's imagine we're still, going through NTI, and you have it May 1, but you need, you go back to school and, in August, and again, totally making this up. I don't have any any more information about, when school will resume or when it won't. But if you go back to school in August or September and you realize that student's not making sufficient progress, you can conduct another annual review that would reset that annual timeline for a year. So that this isn't new. So what I would say in this situation is to just catch your breath and think about, it's still business as usual when it comes to reviewing progress and conducting ARC meetings to make decisions.
Okay. I have many evaluations that still need to have behavior observations in order to triangulate the data. How are we supposed to complete these within the 60-day timeline?
So this is similar to the question previously about, you got almost enough data to make the decision, but you don't have enough. And again, this is where, Todd may need to say something in opposition to what I'm about to say. So I'll say that so you can be prepared. But again, folks, I wouldn't hold up an evaluation if the only documentation that you don't have to make an eligibility determination is behavior observation. Then think about it differently. Can you conduct that evaluation over Skype? Can you talk to a parent on the phone and let them tell you what's going on for the evaluation? You got to get creative about this right now. Think outside the box. If you can't, if there's no possible way to do that, then go ahead and have that ARC and determine, do you have enough data to make the determination? What we don't want to see when we get back to some sense of normal is we don't want to see a bunch of kids who were denied services because of a checkbox not being checked somewhere like a behavior observation. Now saying that, you want to plan in that conference summary, if you determine that child's eligible or not, you want to plan for how you're going to gather that data as soon as you can when we get back to school. Todd, any concerns with that?
No, I don't have concerns with that in general. I think what we have provided in the way of some information to school districts on eligibility determinations is that if the eligibility determination is delayed as a result of COVID-19, then the district should consider providing compensatory services for the equal to the amount of delay in that making that eligibility determination. But by all means, to the extent the district can continue forward and determine eligibility within the timelines that are established in the regulations, then it should do so. Understanding that in the situations where it's unable to do so, if a student is determined eligible and there was a delay in that eligibility determination that made it fall outside of the timelines and regulation, the district should review the need for compensatory services equal to the amount of delay.
Thank you.
The next question, and I will take the first part of the answer on this one, is anyone advocating on behalf of schools to show that we are still providing FAPE even though the instruction and setting are different? And my response from a communication standpoint is yes, because I know that we have seen several districts have shared with us what they are doing in terms of NTI. And I encourage you to continue to send us at the communications, either to me directly in an email or to our staff to tag us with the hashtag, because we have seen some very, very creative ways that special education teachers are reaching out and districts are reaching out to their families. So I would like you to continue to do that so we can tell your stories and we can show how you are advocating for your students. And then if Greta wants to take, or somebody else wants to take out the other part of that.
Yeah, no, Tony, I think that's great. The other thing that I just want to share from a national perspective, I'm actually on the National Association for State Directors of Special Education, the NASD board, and so we have a board meeting every Sunday evening now, and so we talk about what's going on across the nation and all the other states. And I always am quick to share the things that are happening across Kentucky, because I think we are way ahead of the game, essentially. And part of that is because we did have the NTI structure, and we, albeit it wasn't created to, last for 30, 40, 50 days or whatever, but we had it, and we had a mindset of thinking outside the box. And you guys were already implementing creative ways of providing FAPE to students with disabilities. So I'm always quick to share all of the things that are happening in our schools and districts. And I again, big kudos to you for what you're doing. I think just the fact that we've got so many people on this webcast today, as well as the number of questions that we're receiving, that shows, you're advocating for yourself and for each other, and it shows the work that you're doing and the way that you value students with disabilities and their families. So you have my deepest respect and appreciation for what you're doing.
And I promise you, I'll make the promise to you right now, if you share what you're doing with me, I will make sure that it is shared through our social media. I will contact, local media, I'll do whatever I can to get your story out there, because I know you all are doing great work, and we definitely at the department want to share your story. So moving on to the next question is, we understand that service minutes for SDI are not a one-to-one match during this time. Is the same true of related service minutes?
Yeah, again, this is going to have to get back to that. Did the student make reasonable progress in light of the circumstances and where they provided the services? So it goes back to documentation.
Is there any word on the preschool partnership grants? Can they be extended due to the need to cancel events and the closure of the child care centers? Our budget will be off base since it's a June 30th end date.
That's a really good question. I haven't looked into that. Veronica, have you had a chance to look into that?
No, but it is a good question because, we have multiple grants and that's going to be an issue across the board. We are having conversations again, but we're not quite sure how that's gonna pan out.
We'll look into that and then provide a response in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the expectation for OTs to deliver services, direct and or consult?
This goes back to the same thing that we've been saying around all of the related services. It's do alternate, work through alternative means, document and get creative and communicate.
Okay. If the district is not sending report cards for term 3, do we still need to send IEP progress reports that say, quote, concurrent with report cards?
That's a good question. Todd, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have the regulation in front of me, but as I recall, the regulation says that IEP progress reports shall be provided at least as frequently as progress reports to non-disabled students, but no less than once per year. If the school district is not sending a progress report for non-disabled students, then I would think they do not need to send any type of report for students with disabilities. But we can look into that and provide you a specific answer once we can take a look at the regulation.
Is your guidance that we meet as an ARC when all timelines are due and document what we cannot complete, and how will we remedy that?
Absolutely. If you can meet the timeline for, whether it be initial eligibility or annual reviews or 3-year reevals, whatever the timeline is, if you can continue business as usual and adhere to those timelines, then absolutely do that. If you have, like I said, pieces of data that are missing or certain components, then go ahead and document that. If you've got enough data to make decisions, make the decision, document what's missing, and then plan for moving forward. Because, as Todd brought up a really good point a moment ago, if you sit there and do nothing and students are, if they miss services because they would have otherwise been eligible, but nothing happened, then you're looking at a compensatory education situation later, and we would rather handle that now, provide students with the services for which they're entitled to, and then plan for picking up whatever pieces you don't have, in the fall or whenever school's back in session.
Greta, you commented to document services missed. They say that we document services we provide not missed. Do we need to also document services missed?
I think it's wise. Obviously, you're always going to document services that you've provided in the progress. But if you know there are services that you have not provided and you document that, I think it's going to make things a whole lot cleaner for you when we do get back to normal. Because keep in mind, there are going to be situations where parents and guardians are going to exercise dispute resolution, and the more documentation that you have, the better it's going to be for all parties involved.
A student has a 1-hour resource reading per day on his or her IEP. What would be a comparable amount of time to provide the service on an NTI day?
So if it's an hour per day, one of the things you might want to do is we're not saying that you decrease the amount of time or increase the amount of time. Obviously, if you can, get on the phone or Skype or whatever with that kid for an hour per day, that's great. That's the way we would advocate for it to be. If that's not doable for whatever reason, then you're going to have to make some individual determinations based on the needs for that student. It's hard for me to answer that specifically without knowing all of the student-specific data and requirements. So, that's a sticky situation or sticky place for me to go, because I don't want to say do this, not that. But if you want to talk about it, feel free to call me or Veronica or Sylvia, and we can talk about the specifics.
If we send home progress monitoring with NTI packets, how do we collect those? Are we allowed to collect them, or is it not sanitary to do so at this time?
Well, I think that's going to be, some of the procedures are going to have to come in play. If you have questions about that, that's probably something to discuss with your Department of Public Health or your local health departments. If there are alternative ways to do that as well. Thinking of outside of the box, and these are just some suggestions. If you send those things home, or if you email them, or however, you can always take pictures of them with smartphones. A lot of folks have smartphones, and so you can grab pictures like that, send them back. Maybe it's not packets that you send home for progress monitoring. Maybe it's something that you do, calling a parent or online. I don't know, but if you're already sending packets home and collecting them, obviously this would fall into the same procedures that your district's already using.
What is the status of reports for districts who have undergone consolidated monitoring visits?
This is Sylvia. We talked about that a little bit in the slides. They will be coming out soon.
Okay. If an IEP goal is highly specific to peers, i.e., when disagreeing with a peer, student will, how will we monitor a goal without peers?
Yeah, there are going to be those that are going to be super hard, and again, think creatively and outside the box. Are there siblings in the home? Could siblings be considered peers for the sake of the situation that we're in? Could it be that you just have documentation that there were no peers, there were no siblings, and so we receive feedback from the parent on how well the child engaged with the parent or the caregiver, whomever that he or she lives with. But if you're just completely unable to implement and or get progress data for it, then it may be one of those compensatory education issues on the other side of this.
Greta, I just wanted to say, some of these questions about progress monitoring and modifying assignments, your regional special education cooperatives can assist you with those. So don't hesitate to reach out to them. And also those mini webcasts will cover some of that content as well, I'm sure.
Very good point.
Okay. Can you provide guidance on how to do counseling services for students who have this on their IEPs?
It's going to go back to the same conversation that we had about other related services. Communicate with parents and families, determine what people are comfortable with and what can be provided and how it can be provided, and then move forward. It may be Skype, it may be telephone, it may be, I don't know, whatever forms of technology that you can utilize, now's the time to be thinking about that.
Can parents request additional services for their students that are not on the IEP simply because the child is at home now?
That would be an ARC decision. So, a parent may request an ARC meeting to have those conversations, and that's no different than if we were all sitting in a school building and a parent requested an ARC meeting. You would follow the exact same procedures moving forward. And if the ARC determined that the student did need assistive technology or something of that nature, then it would be appropriate to provide it.
Okay, I see a question here that says they've heard two different answers to the same question. I'm not sure if the question is, but it says, where does she want that documented? Conference summary or eligibility in IC? I don't know if that is the question. Or the next question below that is, should eligibility be locked, although evaluation is incomplete?
So with regard to locking documents, I'm going to lean on Amy Patterson to provide some information around that, because I think there are certain implications that go along with locking or unlocking documents.
Right. So you're going to have to lock it if you're going to go ahead and create an IEP. Otherwise, the eligibility will not be populated in the IEP. If it's not complete and if you're not creating a new IEP, then no, don't lock it. All I can say is make sure you document very clearly everything that's going on and the reason you're not locking documents and the reason, if you're late developing an IEP, the reason for that. Just be very clear in your documentation in the conference summary about why, why these things are happening. So, I'm going to say the same thing Greta's saying. It's all about documentation and make sure you're covering all your bases.
Amy, this is Sylvia. I would tend to agree with that because I think the documentation is going to be what saves you in compliance reviews down the road. So if there's a reason you weren't able to provide something and it's reasonable, make sure you're writing all those things down and telling all of those things so that when we go to review those files later, we can see that you took multiple steps and there was, whatever the issue was, all of that's laid out for us. The best place to document those kinds of things would be the conference summary.
Okay, I got a little clarification to the first question. 2 answers to the same question. Do we send progress reports on the IEP or do we not? I think I just want clarification. Do they send progress reports on the IEP or do they not?
So I think probably where the confusion come in with this, and I may be totally wrong, but the first question, someone asked whether progress reports should go out, and we said yes. The second question was whether progress reports should go out if the district was not providing report cards, and I believe Todd said that we would look into that. The situation that this brings up is not necessarily conflicting information, but rather if, going back to the equity piece, if you're providing report cards for all students in the district, but failing to provide progress monitoring reports for students with disabilities, then that's not equitable. And that's not what the regulations say to do. So I hope that brings some clarity around it, because we're saying if you're sending it for everybody, then yes, definitely you're sending it for students with disabilities. If you're sending it for nobody, then I believe we're going to look into that to determine the specific answer, but we don't believe that you have to send it for students with disabilities if you're not sending it for all students.
Okay. How should we handle parent referrals at this time?
So the ARC should still convene, determine, whether or not there's reason to move forward with the referral, and then move forward as best you can. Obviously, there's going to be some barriers to testing, but that goes back to what we've been saying throughout the webcast. You do what you can, and then make decisions based on whether or not you have enough data, or whether you reconvene again after school starts to conduct the testing. I mean, all that's going to be contingent upon the ARC decision and the amount of data that you can collect.
There also seems to be a little confusion as to whether they should be providing group sessions virtually due to confidentiality at this time. And are we going to gather more information on that? Yes,
that goes back, I think, to that telehealth conversation that Sylvia had just a moment ago. So we're working on that, and we'll get more information to you.
Okay. And if a parent requests a suspension of a related services such as speech or O&M only during NTI, can the ARC grant this request?
No, you shouldn't cherry pick the services that are going to be provided. So if this comes up, as I said earlier, my recommendation would be to have conversations with the parent, determine what can you do to break down the barriers and to make this easier? And again, communication, thinking outside the box, documenting all the efforts that the district made. Because remember, as I said earlier, if you just simply say, okay, services are suspended, and then, you know, coming out of this, when dispute resolution situations occur, what's the documentation that you made FAPE available? Because FAPE includes not just the instructional component of special education, but also all of the behavioral and/or related services.
Okay, it says, is it possible to move up the dates for the mini webcast? If we need to change how we're doing anything, we will need that info before April 17th. And I believe they start this Friday. Is that correct? Did I see it on that sheet? I thought the mini webcast
Yes,
started
they do start this Friday.
Okay, and superintendents,
They
we will.
do.
Okay, we will share that PowerPoint. I think I shared some of them on the Kentucky Department of Education's Twitter page already. I was trying to tweet while I was trying to host, while I was trying to moderate, but we will also try to, we will get this PowerPoint out to you that has all of those dates on there. So those mini webcasts will start this Friday, and there's several dates on there.
And also in the meantime, if you need support, again, reach out to your regional special education cooperative, and I'm sure they'll be happy to help you. They will be the ones that are presenting that information, so they will have that available for you now.
Okay. I think there was another one that I was going down here. Another teletherapy question. Virtual signatures for ARCs. Can't we just document that everyone spoke as present, since most of our families don't have access to internet?
I think if you're getting, and I could be wrong here. This is Amy. I think if you're just getting signatures for the ARC, I think that's fine. I think the original question about virtual signatures was documentation that it is okay to send student personally identifiable information over email. I think that's a slightly different situation. But we'll follow up and give more information about that.
If our district sent out a parent letter similar to the letter KDE sent out, but does not ask the parent to sign and send back, do we need to send out the KDE letter because it asks for parent signatures?
No, I don't think the KDE letter requested any parent signatures. Commissioner Brown and I signed that letter for you to distribute to your families. But as I shared with directors of special education during the last call that we had, that's entirely up to districts how or if you share that. We didn't want to put undue burden on the district and say, you know, we're requiring you to pay for the mailing of all this, or we want one person to send this out via email. It was really just a tool for you to have in your hands to provide to parents during this uncertain time, so that they know that districts and KDE and cooperatives are working together jointly, and we're communicating, and we want to ensure them that we are all doing everything we can to ensure that their children are provided with free, appropriate public education.
Okay, and it says, please make sure all questions were asked. Several moved up the list. I am trying to do the best I can, y'all. So if you do not see your question asked, if you can please submit it again, because there are over 100 questions in here, and I am doing my best. All right, next question is, can we count time spent speaking with parents about providing services, how to access platforms, and other activities they can complete with their child as services provided to the child?
I would want to talk about this one specifically. I'm inclined to say no if you're helping parents access certain, you know, like web addresses or things like that, because then, you know, the services that are written on the IEP are for the child, not for the family. So my initial reaction is no. However, if you believe that I'm mistaken or that there's exceptional circumstances for this, then please reach out to us individually, because we may need to look at this through a case-by-case situation.
And Greta, this is Todd. I would add that, IDEA regulations also anticipate providing some help and training guidance to parents from LEAs, and it really treats those as two different things: the guidance and help that you provide to the parents, and then the special education minutes that you provide to the child. So counting the time spent providing guidance to the parent doesn't really seem consistent with the minutes that are meant for special education services to the child.
Thank you.
Okay. HHS has provided some guidance on teletherapy, specifically with respect to HIPAA, but wouldn't teletherapy in the school setting have to comply with FERPA rather than HIPAA?
Todd, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Yes, so in general, school districts have to comply with FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, even when those records are created by a health professional that we would typically think of in terms of a health record. So for example, if your school nurse, and I'm talking about in any setting, whether it's special education or not, if your school nurse creates a record, most people may think about that as a HIPAA record. They think of it like a health record. But in a school setting, if that's created by a school nurse there, it's actually an educational record. It's not a HIPAA record. I think the question comes in when we have some related service providers who may be contractors. They're very much, they're medical professionals in most senses, and they're very much in tune to HIPAA and compliance with HIPAA. And because some of them may be insurance billers and medical providers, they are absolutely bound, and they're going to follow HIPAA rules. So I think it's a communication issue. Working through the new guidance related to telehealth and things like that will help that. But the school district is really going to focus on FERPA compliance and communicate with the provider about that. I think it's really a communication issue. If we can assist with those specific issues, feel free to contact me with some more specific concerns that you have, and I'm happy to try to help sort through that.
Okay. Let's see here. It would be great to have a repository of sorts where the different disciplines, OT, speech, PT, special ed teachers, etc., could share their best practices during this extended period of NTI.
I think that's a great idea, and it tags on very well to the work that Veronica is doing with the special education cooperatives.
Yeah, the cooperatives have already begun to collect some of that information, and they'll be sharing that through their regions, as well as providing some of those resources to the KDE website.
Okay. Can we get consent for the billing of Medicaid services outside of an ARC meeting, thinking that some of our families may now be on benefits given the situation?
I'm not sure without looking. Todd, do you know if there's a requirement to do this within the ARC meeting?
I don't know of that. We can look into that question. I think that's a really good question. Mm-hmm. My kind of initial reaction would be it wouldn't be an ARC determination, because the school district's obligated to provide that whether or not, there's some type of Medicaid reimbursement. So I would think that decision would be outside of the ARC, but we'll look into that.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay. All right, and I think that we have covered most of the questions. If I have missed any questions, I will give you all a few minutes to submit some more questions. I do want to reiterate the importance of sharing what you're doing, and I know that our special ed coordinators are also going to share with us. Just during this conversation, I have had 2 reporters text me and say, please, please, please share, because they would like to know and also share some of the examples that you all are doing to meet the needs of your students. So please reach out to me and let me know what you're doing, and so that we can share these, share this with throughout the Commonwealth. Greta, if you want to, I don't know if you want to continue if there's any other points you wanted to make while we wait for some additional questions.
So yeah, thank you, Tony. The first thing that I would like to say is just, a huge thank you to everybody for taking time to log on to this webcast and express so much interest in how to best educate students with disabilities. It's very impressive, and I know things are going on and you're super busy and it's at the end of the day. So, kudos to you. I know there's been tons of questions, and we've got some answers that we need to get back to you on. But just know that if we don't have, immediate answers, then we're still available. Reach out to any of us. Our staff, obviously we're teleworking, but we're still working, and we don't want to see any decrease in the services that we're providing to you, because we're all in this together for kids. One of the things that I do want to draw your attention to, though, is the Director of Special Education listserv. There's a Kentucky Dose listserv where I push out information, and I think all directors are on it, as well as some of our partners. If you are not on it, but you need to be or want to be, then please reach out to Chris Thacker or Amy Patterson so that we can get you added. One of the things that actually Chris just sent me as for something to consider during this time, and I'll look to directors of special education to weigh in with thoughts on this, is opening up the Director of Special Education listserv to special education teachers and other staff temporarily. Obviously, we don't want, a year from now to just be flooding inboxes, but as we're pushing out all of these resources, I'm open to the idea of opening it up to all of your special education staff so that they have information in real time, and maybe it would take some of the burden off of directors of having to ensure that they get all of my emails and then send all of that out to their staff. So it's just something to think about. We're happy to extend it temporarily if it works better for you guys.
Okay, we have just a few more that were submitted to us, and the one is, what is a reasonable time frame to have all of these ARCs to discuss comp ed?
I think that's going to it's going to vary based on the amount of progress students are making, or the lack thereof, or what services that you were able to provide and what services you weren't. Obviously, if you are documenting a ton of services that were missed, then you need to get into those ARC meetings quickly. If you've got documentation that, just because you're not having an ARC meeting doesn't mean you don't review your students' progress, right? So if you're reviewing your progress and the student is making significant progress in light of the situation, you were able to provide all your services, then that's not going to be your top priority. You're going to have to prioritize these as you move forward, and you definitely want to prioritize those students who are struggling, not making progress, or who had tons of missed services.
Okay, there's a question, kind of a hypothetical. Child is turning 9 soon, and evaluation data is not sufficient to go ahead with a decision. Is it okay to continue his level of support he had in a current IEP and extend his IEP until we can change student label according to the data?
This is one of those questions we've also asked OSEP about, because it's very specific as far as when students are no longer eligible for DD. But again, it goes back to that something is better than nothing. I wouldn't, if a student has been receiving these services, I would not immediately cease services just because we've reached the 9th birthday. Would continue on, plan for the evaluation. I would conduct an ARC meeting, discuss what data that you have, discuss the needs of the student, and plan for, this essentially is going to be one of those contingency plans, for lack of a better word. So what are you going to do so that you're just not tossing this kid out on his or her head to say, sink or swim, right? So So again, it's going to be a common sense approach, and that's how we're going to monitor it. And if OSEP provides additional information that says, do X, not Y, then we'll push that out to you.
Okay. The question is, when will this video archive be available? I would like all of my special ed staff and administrators watching it, and to thank you for having it. I can go ahead and answer that question. Yesterday, when we had an 1.5 hour webcast for the task force, it took about 45 minutes to get it up. So it'll be available here probably about an hour after the webcast ends. We are also, from the communications department, going to do a story for Kentucky Teacher, and we will include the link in there as well. So just take a look out for our special, on our social media accounts, and we will include it also in an email, the link to the story, which is a recap of this, and a link to the video. The next question is, just to clarify, even though there's no flexibility on timelines, we do need to hold an ARC just to document the timeline was missed. Couldn't that be documented once the testing is completed?
I don't think that you hold an ARC meeting just to document that the timeline was missed. I think this is where the importance of communication comes into play. So if you're going to be talking to the parent anyway about why the timeline is being missed, which I suspect you will be because you certainly should be, then why not go ahead and have that as an ARC meeting and explain to the parent all of the components, because folks, this comes to us, especially those of us in special education, this comes to us, as second nature. But if I'm a parent of a student and we're looking at an initial evaluation, specifically initial, and you're telling me that my son or daughter may have a disability, but you need all of these pieces of data, whether it's an IQ and academic and social emotional and all these behavioral observations, I may not know what those pieces are that you want, but in my mind, school's still in session. So why aren't you servicing my kid? Because he or she's obviously still struggling. So it's best to have that ARC meeting explain what all of those components are to the testing, and keeping in mind, parents are super stressed right now as well. And so, we may have to share that information a couple of times, and that's okay. And explain why you can't get whatever it is that you need, but how you plan to make sure that the child, all of his or her needs are met moving forward.
Okay, is there any word on extension of end of year submission of indicators such as independent 11? Am I saying that right? It's IND.11.
Sylvia, are you
Indicator
still on?
11. Yeah, I'm still on. I think it's all these, we're having as many conversations as we can about flexibility. We haven't looked at indicator 11 specifically in terms of the date. We would need to know when it was the absolute, drop dead date from the Office of Special Education Programs. And then we would provide as much flexibility as we were able to provide there as well.
Okay, and then there's, I think one last suggestion, because it's 3:47 and we're going to wrap up, and I'll let Kevin do the finish wrap up here, is open up the listserv to principals now, as they are usually the ARC chair. Thank you. So again, before I hand this over to Kevin, just to recap, we are capturing all of these questions that are being submitted during these webcasts. We are putting them into a sheet that we are going to put into the yellow sheet, which is the FAQ document that's on our website, on our COVID-19 website. It'll take us about a day or two to get all of this updated. We're doing that with every single one of our webcasts. So just give us a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of time to get it inputted and then through legal and all of that stuff. And then we will also send out a video link to this chat, as well as a story from the communications department here within the next couple of hours. And I'll let Kevin go ahead and close out.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you to our special ed team and our legal team for this. I think this has been very beneficial for everyone. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. At one point, we had over 550 viewers. This was also the first time that we've had a major webcast without individuals physically present in the 300 building, which is also a testament to our OET staff about bringing all of us up to speed on this technology. And we still have a few little glitches here and there. And I know you all are having some of the same issues as you all are doing board meetings and other things virtually now, but that's to be expected. I want to remind the superintendents that we will have our the next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, April 7th. If there's a need this week for an additional webinar, if something changes or if there, as we know, unfortunately, because of the situation, things change day to day, we will schedule that. But as of right now, the next superintendent webinar will be Tuesday, April 7th from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's going to be a special webinar devoted to funding issues. So we'll be geared towards superintendents and finance officers. We want to go over the CARES Act that we're still learning about with the provision of funds that will be flowing to all states because of this crisis. An update on where we might be with any state funding issues. A budget is expected to be passed, of course, here tomorrow, I believe. And sent to the governor. And then, of course, any questions you have, how all that interacts with your local funding and development of budgets and all of those things. So we appreciate all of you, what you're doing in your communities. Special ed directors, I know you're on the call, haven't really had a chance to talk to you individually. I want to thank you, what you do every day. I know it's a tough job. You all are all leaders in your communities now more than ever. People look to the school system and the school district for guidance and support, and you all are continuing to do that, even though a month ago we had no idea we would be where we are now. So I want to thank all of you all. It's an honor for me to be able to work alongside you during this time. Hang in there. And as the governor says, we will get through it. We will get through it because we are the Kentucky education family, and we are Team Kentucky. So everybody have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.